Hello, friends. Salo, Happy Home YouTube channel. And as I forewarned you, I'm going to be doing a lot of content today because I got a lot on my mind. I want to get it all out at once. Because I have to go back to work tomorrow. And, you know, work is such a problem. It's such an inconvenience. I hate my fucking job. I absolutely hate it. Unfortunately, I'm forced to do it against my will because I got bills to pay, right? And we all feel that way. I don't think many people in the world really like getting up and going to their job. I thrive when I don't have to go to work. So I'm sad that I have to go back, but got to do what I got to do. Anyway, I want to talk to you today about Greenland and Denmark. And I have been vocal in the past few weeks coming out against Trump's behavior with Greenland. But I want to be very clear. I support us having Greenland now more than ever, because I do understand, looked up, did some research on it, and I have a better understanding of why it's important that we actually do make Greenland the 51st state. However, I have been angry about it. I'm still angry about him bragging that he was going to, actually bragged in an interview that he was going to give cash payments to Greenlanders to buy their support for the U.S. purchasing their island. And I found that to be egregiously unethical, unprofessional, and quite a slap in the face to the American people, because we are still trying to pay our utility bills. We're still trying to buy groceries and pay those utility bills in the same month. And it is completely a slap in the face, especially when Doge, Musk, and Trump bragged about tariff dividends they were allegedly going to give Americans and Doge dividends they were going to give Americans. Hey, you got money to spend on Greenlanders. You got money to give us. Okay, so that was my beef with him. Also because up until recently, I realized we have a foothold in Greenland already. We've got military bases there. I think we have oil wells there. We own the rights to mineral mines there. So it did not make any sense to me why he had to absolutely own that nation. Now I kind of have a big understanding as to why it would be beneficial to the Greenlanders to support us. Denmark, well, first of all, over the weekend, Live Now News did a lengthy interview. And if you've never watched Fox Live Now 24/7 unfiltered news, I recommend it because they have all sides to every story and they do lengthy interviews. They sit back and they let these people talk and they interview everybody. They just did a big interview with Jacob Frey from Minneapolis, and they did an interview with one of the boss men over there at NATO, because NATO is completely being asinine against the U.S. regarding what's happening in Greenland. And they were making these arguments that, we already have a foothold there, and that the big deal is the icebreakers, because China and Russia have massive amounts of icebreakers, which is necessary to get to Greenland, and we only have like 2 or something like that. Well, the problem with this is, and then the guy from NATO said, well, we have all kinds of icebreakers. So by respecting your membership in NATO and your NATO allies, we would be there with you with our icebreakers. So I don't understand what's going on. Basically, he didn't understand this. Well, if you look at Denmark and what Denmark is actively doing right now at this very moment today, specifically with regard to immigration, you would see why it might not be a good idea for the Danes to continue holding on to Greenland, and why Greenlanders might actually benefit from us having a foothold there. Because you would have all of the American commerce. Your businesses would be free of tariffs. You probably won't have taxes anymore. There would be a lot of benefit to Greenlanders coming on board with the U.S. But buying their support, shame on you. Those dividends are our money, especially here in Minnesota. With all the fraud that's taken everything from us, shame on you. It's a slap in the face. But I got to put my glasses on, so forgive the reflection, because I actually have to read to you. If I didn't see from the National Archives and NATO itself is where I've got my resources here. The myth of Denmark. This is crazy. Denmark's dark side is what I'm calling that. Denmark has some of the strictest immigration laws in Europe. They confiscate refugees' valuables as they come over the border to pay for what they call the jewelry law. Ghetto laws that classify immigrant-heavy neighborhoods. They impose forced relocations, housing demolition, double penalties for crimes in immigration zones, pressure on immigrants to abandon cultural identity to become Danish. Now, when you immigrate from one country to another and you want to become a citizen in that country, you do have to assimilate to some level. Here in America, we encourage you, of course, to assimilate, attempt to learn the language the best you can, learn the laws the best you can, embrace your heritage, but remember, you're coming here to become American, okay? And that's what's not happening in the Somali community. Freedom of speech. Denmark strongly defends free speech, including speech that may be considered harmful. Unfortunately, things like Quran burnings are protected by law, normalization of anti-immigration rhetoric in politics, minority communities feeling unprotected socially, even if legally equal. The paradox, the free speech exists, but social belonging does not always allow for it. Denmark is often described as polite but emotionally closed to outsiders. Immigrants and minorities report difficulty finding jobs despite qualifications, social isolation, being treated as permanent outsiders even if born Danish. Racism is often quiet, bureaucratic, and polite, not loud, but very real. Their legal system is quite harsh. Denmark has preventative detention laws. Surveillance powers expanded under security laws. Policy authority in high-risk zones, and the system is efficient but not gentle. People can feel legally powerless because everything is done by the book, even when unjust. Child welfare controversies. Denmark's child protective services have faced criticism for removing children from immigrant families for no justifiable reason. Cultural misunderstanding, being treated as neglect, limited legal resources once the state intervenes, and some families describe it as authoritarianism. They are ruled by consensus, which sounds good, but it also means real opposition struggles to gain power. Immigration skepticism exists across nearly all major parties. Media often supports the dominant narrative, and this creates an illusion of unity while suppressing uncomfortable dissent. Mental health beneath the surface. The high happiness rankings. Well, Denmark has notable antidepressant use. Very note, meaning a lot of people are on a lot of antidepressant drugs. Social loneliness is common and elderly isolation is significant. Happiness metrics don't reflect the emotional reality. The deeper truth, but that Denmark isn't evil, but it is a country that prioritizes order, uniformity, and social stability, sometimes over compassion, diversity, and individuality. It works beautifully if you fit in, and it doesn't if you don't. So, Denmark actually treats their immigrants very poorly. Unlike America, where we welcome immigration, lawful immigration. What shocks me is that Americans that are against us purchasing Greenland, they're the ones that would fight against all of these social injustices. Denmark has a quiet Nazi secret service, racist underbelly. And all of these stupids in Minneapolis protesting are protesting against all of that. And accusing ICE of doing exactly what Denmark is doing. So Americans that are against us purchasing Greenland are supporting the racism and subversion of Denmark's laws against its own people. Now, there's also another side to this. NATO actually told Denmark that they needed to beef up their border security with regard to Russia and China. in Greenland, that they needed to do something there effectively to prevent Russia and China from getting to Greenland and taking it over. And what we need to understand strategically is that Greenland, if Russia or China or North Korea or any adversary got a hold of Greenland, they could put missile silos on there and they could send nukes our way and blow the fuck out of us. So it's imperative that that we understand that NATO has scolded Denmark for, not keeping up their end of the bargain when it comes to international security, which is part of what you're required to do when you're a member of NATO. And the person from NATO that was being interviewed on Live Now was condemning, not really condemning, but kind of being that, that abusive, psychologically abusive person. Well, the U.S., they're going against their membership and they're going to alienate their allies. No. When in actuality, NATO has been bitching at Denmark for a really long time to beef up their Greenland borders and get their shit together. And they have failed to do so. So unlike America, Denmark is violating any NATO membership they may or may not have, or any international laws, because they are not complying. So Denmark doesn't seem to have any regard for the law. It doesn't have the regard for lawful immigration. They are obviously racist. And they treat their people with an iron fist. So Greenlanders would actually be much better off if they were the 51st state as opposed to being under Danish rule. But like all victims, Stockholm Syndrome eventually will set in and you will start to support and believe in your captors' rhetoric. And I think that's what's happening here in Denmark. So I don't support Trump giving my money to Greenlanders to buy their support and loyalty. I think that is shameless. Should not be tolerated and should not be allowed, Congress. However, I understand now a little better after listening to the Secretary of NATO or whatever he is, after listening to his interview and seeing their perspective on this, and reading up and doing some research on the social culture in Denmark, which is also spilled over into Greenland and what's going on there, I think, and the fact that Denmark doesn't seem to care much about the security of Greenland because they have been non-compliant in taking the steps necessary to prevent an incursion, an annex, a takeover by Russia, China, North Korea, etc. So Denmark is not this quiet little spring daisy sitting there being neutral and nice, run by monarchies. The whole reason that America exists is because we fought against monarchies and won, and now they are a monarchy, and that they don't want to give up their control. We know that. But I think it's important to see both sides and to understand that Greenland, it might actually be beneficial to everybody. And I know that there's going to be, this year is not going to end without Trump wanting to get a hold of Cuba. Now, that might be a little easier to buy because Cubans keep coming over here all the time. And if anybody is old enough to recall, or they heard their parents or grandparents talk about what Cuba was like before Castro, it was a jewel of the earth. Wealthy, wealthy people. Beautiful, like beautiful, opulent jewel, a crown jewel of that region. And they all come here. They risk their lives on rafts and dinghies to do that 90 mile stretch of ocean to get here. And many lose their lives doing it because of the communist regime that's there. And now we have many, many wonderful Americans of Cuban heritage here. And we have been the better for that. Cuba's really lost a lot. And I think because they are so close, of course, their missile silos, yeah. We had an issue with the nukes, I think back, what's it called, 13 Days? There's a film, actually, about those critical days in the JFK administration where Russia and Cuba and whatnot, they had nukes. They had the ability to nuke our asses, or at the very least, blow up our southern border with missiles. That's how close Cuba is. So Cuba is also strategically important to the U.S., and I would back him up wanting to buy Cuba. I think it would be a benefit to everybody. And then we can open Cuba back up. The food, the music, the art, the traditions, the heritage. Oh, I would definitely risk a flight or a boat trip to go to Cuba if Cuba ever gets liberated. So look into Denmark a little more and understand that Denmark is not the little spring daisy that they claim to be. They are a bunch of racist bastards. And if I were a reasonable American, which I don't know if I'm reasonable, but I know I'm American, I would want us to take Greenland to protect them from Denmark. Protect them from Russia, China, North Korea, Iran. Protect them from those horrible people. Because Denmark doesn't care about Greenland. Denmark is kicking them like they're the redheaded stepchild. And I think that anybody who has a human bone in their body, humanitarian essence to them, would want the best for Greenland. But President Trump, don't buy their loyalty. Buy our loyalty by giving us back our frickin' money. And until next time, do good and be good.